Hello and welcome. For decades, the BBC has been a trusted source of news for millions of people around the world. Even today, it continues to be one of the most trusted news brands, here in India as well. BBC News reaches a global multi-language audience of more than 489 million people every week, which is pretty impressive. But there are also significant challenges for the broadcaster, indeed as there are for all mainstream news platforms, including here in India. From dealing with fake news and misinformation to impartiality in the times of social media to the tabloidization of television news. Joining us on NDTV today, we're happy to have with us the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie. Mr. Davie, thank you very much for joining us.
A pleasure.
Let me begin with a sort of overall question. You know, we've all grown up, as I said, trusting the BBC as a source of news. How are you as an organization then dealing with the multiple challenges from, to begin with, digital media, social media, and the sort of misinformation and fake news that throws up?
Well, there's no doubt the market is changing fast. And if you think when I was growing up, those limited number of channels and now infinite choice, the explosion of digital media, the first thing I think for the BBC is to hold our nerve, to really double down on impartial news, searching for the truth, try and be fair and balanced. I think that is a real challenge now with so much noise around us. The other thing is we're very active in looking where there is disinformation and stories being told that aren't true and exposing them. So I think that's the first thing we need to do, which is absolutely focus on where we're different and focus on the truth. The other thing, of course, is we need to make sure that we are creating digital services. We are where people want to see news and hear news, and that's important for us as well.
How challenging, though, is it to be impartial, as you said, in an environment where everything is so polarized and so opinionated? Social media is a part of it, but let's look at the war right now in Ukraine and the competing narratives that you have, Russia on one side, Ukraine on the other. How does the BBC maintain its balance in a story like this?
Well, the first thing is I think you have to make a deliberate choice to say, I am going to search for impartial truth and balance. I know that sounds obvious, but to your question, with so much noise, so many competing narratives, I spend a lot of time with our journalists just making sure we're seeking out the truth. We're trying to not just be drawn into one narrative, get close to the front line, also get experts involved. You know, we have fantastic journalists who have decades of experience. They are passionate about searching for the truth. So I don't think that's old-fashioned. I think it's harder because in a polarized environment, I may say something and people, off it goes on social media, people say that you've got a particular point of view. We have to really hold firm as the BBC and just go after the truth. And to your point, I think it's as hard as it's ever been.
But again, when you have a situation where you do with Russia clearly having been the aggressor here in Ukraine, and Russia also really clamping down on the media and enforcing censorship, how do you not take a position on that as a media organization? How do you, again, balance that out?
Well, simply put, I think we're there to tell the story and the truth of what is going on. So if there is an aggressor, we say that. I think the other thing is we're not there to be what I would say vanilla, without opinion, without calling a story. So our correspondents who often lived in Moscow for decades will actually talk about their take on a story. But they're doing that based not on a political position. They're basing it on the truth, the facts, where we are in a situation. As I say, I think it's hard now. I think there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of pressures. Sometimes there are restrictions on our reporting. If that's the case, by the way, I think we have to be clear where those restrictions are and either be clear with our viewers and listeners about what those restrictions are, but also reporting outside places like Russia into Russia. That's how we work.
So how do you give a Russian perspective of this war? Because I come to this since it is the big story right now, and there has been a certain view, at least expressed in India as well, that Western media organizations like the BBC or the New York Times, etc., look at this story through a certain lens, through a Western lens, which is therefore very pro-Zelensky, pro-Ukraine. They're not trying to understand the Russian perspective. How do you see that?
I think it's really important that organizations like the BBC deeply understand the Russian perspective. And if you look at our correspondents that we've got based in Moscow, and that have got deep experience of the Russian lens on life, on how this conflict is progressing. That's really important we tell that story. By the way, I think within that, there's obviously what the Russian leadership and the Kremlin narrative. There's also what Russian people are thinking, what their view of this conflict is. But I totally take your point. I think we cannot be led by just one narrative. We as the BBC have got to look at what's going on.
At the same time, and I know impartiality has been a principle that's very dear to you, and you have a whole set of guidelines on how the BBC should be impartial. But how does one define impartiality?
Well, I don't think impartiality is simply here's one political party, here's another political party, with equal time. Impartiality, it's a long word, it's kind of, to your point, it's a complex topic. But I think at its heart is something very simple, which is this a fair reflection of events? Are we seeking the truth, or are we trying to spin a line? Yeah? And at the BBC, you're there to seek out the truth. We do it without fear or favour. We are absolutely there to say, what is the story? If you speak to my teams, they're obsessed with telling the story, telling people's story as it is. That's what impartiality is.
Would you though agree that there are some issues on which there honestly isn't another side to the story, or there isn't a balance? I'll give you an example. I think there's been a lot of debate in the international media about having anti-vaxxers on television, or putting their point of view, giving them equal airtime. We had the same controversy about those who doubted, the climate change deniers, right? In India, we have stories, unfortunately, like the lynching of a Muslim by a mob, where, to me as a journalist, I don't see what the other side is. Would you agree that there are some stories where impartiality has to be weighed very differently?
I'd make 2 points on that. Firstly, I think there are some values that we hold dear as the BBC in terms of their democratic values. They're also values around inclusion, so treating people fairly, hearing their voice. So some of the incidents you talk about, there's no doubt there in terms of, there are principles that we stand for around a fair and free society that are critical to us. So there are building blocks there. I think on the other side, when it comes to a debate like anti-vaxxers, 2 things on that. Firstly, what is the scientific facts? That's the bedrock of the BBC's work. What is the truth here? What is the data? Because people, in some ways, need to be able to decide for themselves, and there's an element of trust in the audience. So the first thing is, have we got true scientific information? Are we calmly assessing the facts? And we've got wonderful health and science editors who can do that. The second thing is, within that, is do you give voice to people with different views? I personally, and by the way, I don't think it's equal voice. You were saying, I don't think it's, and here's someone who believes, and here's someone.
Exactly.
But I do think in a society where there is stories circulating, or there's voices that are being heard, sometimes talking to those voices, putting the facts to them, challenging things that you believe not to be true, is part of the journalistic job of an organisation like the BBC, rather than allowing those stories just to grow online unchallenged. But it's not about equal weight. It's not about equal weight. I think it's more complex than that.
You've also, as an organization, and I think all of us are struggling with this, been dealing with the challenge of your journalists airing their views on social media, and journalists are human. We're all part of the society we live in. There was a controversy, for example, when one of your senior journalists had retweeted something that Piers Morgan had said about the way the UK government handled COVID. How difficult is it to enforce these rules of no opinion on social media? And some would say, is that fair in these times? It's
not no opinion. So you don't come to the BBC and you get rid of your opinions. It's what it is no political bias. And we do not want people who are journalists at the BBC to be getting into those polarised political debates. They may have an opinion about where this leaves a political leader, or an opinion on the situation. So they're calling it journalistically. It's really important that it's not a kind of washed out, very kind of lacking in context, but also lacking in flavour. It's exciting. Impartiality is not a choice to be boring. It's actually a choice to go after a story. But I do think, and it's difficult, it's really difficult, particularly people joining the BBC, and we have had challenges where we've had to say, look, if you come to the BBC, you leave your politics at the door. We're not a political campaigning organisation.
But if a journalist, sorry to interrupt, but if a journalist sees the government is mishandling, let's say, COVID, and is really messing it up, shouldn't a journalist call that out and challenge the establishment?
Of course, but based on the facts.
Yes.
So they could say, this situation, this policy, based on the objectives set by a government, is not working because it hasn't delivered that. That's fine. That's fine. That is about factual reporting. But the next day they might be looking at the opposition and saying how their policies and assessing their policies. You know, if you go to my top journalists, I've just had a political editor who served 7 years. I don't know how she votes. Yeah?
That's good. That's a sign of a good
I have no
journalist.
idea how my top journalists vote. That's really important to the BBC. We want people who are not politically aligned. They are reporting fairly without fear and favour. So I'd expect that analysis of every political party. And to your point, that does not mean that they can't say this has not worked, or this has worked, or they set objectives, this has been successful, this bit hasn't worked. That's absolutely part of journalism.
So if one of your political journalists called out Boris Johnson for Partygate and said that, you know, it looks like rules were violated based on X, Y, Z, would you be okay with that?
Of course, if it were a factually based story and it was based on events and the data, of course, that's what we do. As I say, this isn't about journalism that's not exciting, there's a worry, isn't there, that in the online world everything has to be
instant,
noisier, bigger opinions. You can have that about storytelling and the facts. So I want people to be excited about that. We're an organisation that really is searching for truth. And my personal view is that's going to be more important rather than less important as we head into the future.
How are you then dealing with the issue of the tabloidization of television news? I mean, you have, a sort of a Fox News equivalent that's come up in Britain in the last few months. How does the BBC view that? And we're having those challenges here, which I'll come to as well.
Look, you're going to smile, but I love competition. They're doing things that are different to what we're doing. That's fine. I've always read newspapers that have a big opinion, that will always shout about things. They have a political leaning. That's great. I enjoy reading those papers. But I also come to the BBC, which is a different environment where we're searching for the truth. Now, as I say before, this doesn't have to be a boring environment. It can be exciting. It can be punchy. The debate can be interesting. But it's a different thing. So, I'm happy that the news market is competitive. It's really important.
But doesn't that also raise concerns when it becomes like a tabloid on television? The way Fox sort of, drove misinformation in America and that the same could happen in Britain.
I think the concern is if that's the only way people are getting media. And if you get a situation where the media market is wholly polarised, where everyone is, frankly, driving a narrative that may or may not be based on the facts or their opinion to a point where you're losing the facts, really, really dangerous. I think that's why organisations like the BBC, with all this noise around us, have to hold true. Because I think that the worry is you go, I may need to be more tabloid, to use your word, to get impact. Yeah, I've got to shout that loud. I've got to do things differently, or I've got to be like other people. I actually think that's the wrong strategy. I think for the BBC we need to be differentiated and absolutely calmly say this is what the facts are and tell the story. I think people are interested in what's going on, genuinely, behind all the noise.
Have you had a chance to watch Indian news television? Have you seen the clip of Mr. McAdams?
I haven't.
To begin with?
Sorry. No.
You haven't?
No.
Well, we had an anchor on one of the channels shouting at the guest and telling him to keep quiet. And it was the wrong guest. The guest he was shouting at was actually keeping quiet, and it was
Right.
actually quite funny. We'll play that for you. But
I must see the clip. It sounds like, yeah.
It's quite hilarious. But it kind of underlines the state of Indian news television today. And I don't know if you've actually had a chance to see what Indian news television is like,
Look,
apart from
I've
NDTV?
I've seen a bit, but I wouldn't be critical. I mean, there's nothing worse than someone like myself coming and criticising, what's going on in other countries around that. I think, I believe in consumers, listeners, viewers, enjoying their television. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to be critical of that. That's not what, I'm not here to judge the market. That's not my job. My job is to make sure the BBC makes exciting, entertaining, interesting television news, but based on going after the truth. Simple as that. So my concerns, in some ways, are not on the broader market. My concerns are to make sure the BBC is differentiated. To your point, you've got lots of channels. I think the BBC needs to do something different.
Finally, coming back to the war in Ukraine, how is the BBC as an organization looking after its reporters and journalists on the ground? And this is important because we have journalists on the ground as well, who've been going from India around the world. We've seen, unfortunately, casualties on the ground. How are you looking at their safety and the coverage of this very difficult situation?
Well, these situations are incredibly tough for the journalists and their teams, by the way. So let's not forget the camera crews that are out there.
Yeah.
So these groups that are going in, I would say a few things. One is they're doing brave and wonderful work and important work, because seeing the reality of what's going on the ground and reporting it is, not work, many of us would do. So I pay enormous tribute to them. What I would say is the BBC's got decades of experience. We're 100 years old, and we're used to, reporting in where there is risk, and you never get rid of the risk. So these people are very brave. But what you can do is put high-risk teams beside them, people who are really experienced in assessing a situation, making sure they're getting the right support, equipment, all the things you need. I mean, before we send someone into a front line, we would be spending a lot of time planning what's the risk levels, where are they going, what exactly is the situation. That doesn't mean, by the way, that we don't take calculated decisions to put people into the front line to tell a story, and they want to do that. But I think we're very, very careful on ensuring that the risks are managed, and we're doing all we can to protect them.
All right, Tim Davie, wonderful to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for talking to NDTV. Thank you.
Thank you.